Last week we started another series on persevering faith. And last week itself we looked at mountain-moving faith. And we considered Noah as the one who had a mountain-moving faith. And we considered how Noah must have struggled to build that ark. You know, and I gave the illustration of that ark that I was privileged to go into in Kentucky, which those who have constructed it to the standards, to the measurements of Noah's ark, they have used 3.3 million feet of timber. And this week I was trying to figure out with my wife, for somebody who didn't have a power saw, somebody who didn't have the equipment that we have today, by the time you have brought together 3.3 million feet of timber and joined the logs, the rooms for all the animals, you know, in that ark in Kentucky, they have subdivided it, you know, the 3 levels. And they have showed you how it was possible to put the elephants, the giraffes, the lions, the birds, you know, because they have brought all of them there, 2 by 2, all the animals that you can think about. It was a humongous project. It was a faith-moving mountain. But today we move on to Abraham, the father of faith, under the banner of persevering faith. For indeed, if Noah's was a mountain-moving faith, for Abraham, it was none other than persevering faith. This man persevered in faith. In fact, there's no other biblical character mentioned throughout the Bible as many times as Abraham is mentioned in the Bible. He is called the friend of God. He is claimed by 3 religions, the Judaism, the Christians, and the Muslims as their father. But the Bible tells us in Galatians 3 that all those who believe in Abraham are children of faith. They are children of God. And yet, when you look at him, at his life closely, you realize actually that this was just an ordinary man. He was just a man like you and I. Actually, he was more ordinary than quite a number of other biblical characters. There's a man who grew up in upcountry, or rather, who dwelt in upcountry, in the tents. He didn't have a large family to boast about. He didn't come from a large family either. We only know of 3 of his brothers. He was actually a nomad. And I can't talk a lot about nomads with Tanin here. But Abraham was actually a nomad. He was very, very ordinary. In fact, most of us are more privileged in matters of faith than Abraham. Because some of you were born in Christian families. Some of you are brought up by parents who are so strict in matters faith. Abraham, we are told, he was an idol worshiper. He grew up as an idol worshiper. Up to the time he was 75 years old, Abraham was actually an idol worshiper. That's what the book of Joshua tells us. And then we ask ourselves, if this is Abraham, or if that was Abraham, an idol worshiper, a very ordinary man, a nomad who didn't have a permanent place to stay, in the book of Hebrew we learned that he was staying from tent to tent in the land that he was promised to inherit. Then, what made him so unique that the rest of the Bible is full of this man? That God says, this is none other than my friend. That was privileged for it to be said, every person who believes, you and I included, we are children of Abraham. What did he do? What did he have that we don't have? Or that we can try to emulate today? You know, someone has said that doubt, the animal called doubt, has 2 arguments. And this is the animal that Abraham dealt with through his lifetime. Because doubt argues, or rather asks 2 questions. Is God able to do this? Or can God do this? It's a question of God's ability. Can God do this? Doubt also asks another question. Will God do this? A question of his willingness to do this. And when we are not able to get an answer to those two questions, then we persist in doubt and in unbelief. And when you look at the life of Abraham, you realize that Abraham actually dealt with these two until he actually realized in faith that there are also two arguments. That God is able to do this, God can do this because he is omnipotent, because he's a great God. He is omnipresent. He is the El Shaddai, as we shall see later. But also, God can do this or will do this because he has promised, because he has given his word. If there's one thing that Abraham was able to prove, is that what God has said he will do, he will do. And so I want us to consider four attributes, or four things, four advantages that Abraham had that we can try to emulate today. The number one is that his faith kept growing. He had what you would call a growing faith. He also had what you would call an obedient faith. He had what we would also call patient faith. And finally, but not the least, he had the El Shaddai as his benefactor. He had the El Shaddai as his benefactor. Let's look at his growing faith. You know, I don't know whether you have ever had this, that we start dying the minute we stop growing. When we stop growing, we start dying. One of my professors in college told us that many Kenyans, most Kenyans, start becoming illiterate the minute we graduate from colleges and high schools and universities. Immediately, he told us, once you get your degree, that day, if you are to follow majority of Kenyans, you start your journey towards illiteracy. Because we stop growing academically, because we no longer want to see books. I don't know when was the last time those of you who are not in school were holding a geography book, and you are trying to remind yourself or to expand the knowledge that you are given by your teachers in geography in those years. Or mathematics. You know, we finish school and it's like, Fuchs, mathematics, gone. And we start our journey to illiteracy as far as the mathematics is concerned. But Abraham continued growing. Abraham continued growing. When Abraham was called, we have already said that he was an idolater. He was in an idolater's family. You know, his family did not know God. He had never heard the voice of God. He was just like you and I when we got saved, those who are saved. He was just like you and I when you heard God's voice and you decided, as we sang earlier, that you are going to follow Jesus from that moment henceforth. And that's why he left. That's why he was told, leave. Leave your family. Leave your country. Leave your father's household. In other words, come out of idolatry. Start worshiping me. That's why he had to leave his country. Because in his country, among his father's household, among his people, his tribe, his clan, all those, he could not quite grow in his faith. And so God told him, leave. And Abraham left. That was the first manifestation of a growing faith. That for a man who had never heard the voice of God, when he heard this voice, he was able to tell, this is not just the gods I worship. This is not just another voice, but this must be the God who created heavens and the earth. And so he left, not knowing where he was going. He was just told, leave, and I'll show you where you will go. And he left. That was faith in Genesis chapter 12. And it didn't stop there. When Abraham reached Canaan, in Genesis chapter 12 and verse 6, he started building altars. He started claiming the land for God. He went, he found people who worship idols, just like they worshipped in Ur of Chaldeans. But when he reached there, he started building altars in the places of worship where the Canaanites used to worship their idols. He started claiming that land. It's as if he went and told them, you know what? I've been promised this land. You may still be living in it. You may still be worshiping in it. But this is my land, and I'm claiming it for that God who called me. I'm claiming it for that God who created heavens and the earth. So he started building altars. We are told in Shechem he built an altar. At Bethel he built an altar. And then he left Bethel. He went to another place called Negev. And things turned something else, or to something else in Negev. We are told in Deuteronomy chapter 12, when Abraham reached Negev, there was a drought. And this is where what I would like us to notice. Because this is what makes Abraham just like you and I on matters of faith, on matters of walking with God. There was a drought in Negev. And what did Abraham do at Negev? He did like everybody else was doing. He actually went to Egypt. You know, he didn't ask God. He didn't pray. He didn't tell the Lord, you brought me to this land, but now there is drought. What do I do? I think he just had other farmers, other pastoralists, other nomads, the few floods that he had made in Negev, in Shechem, and in Bethel, and Ai. Those are some of the areas that are mentioned when he arrived in Canaan. He asked them, what do you do when there is drought? And they must have told him, you know, in Egypt, they don't depend on the rain. They depend on Nile. So in Egypt, there is food all the time. Let's go to Egypt. And that's exactly what Abraham did. And I don't know what is your Egypt, but each one of us has an Egypt somewhere. We have somewhere we rush to without asking God. There's somewhere we rationalize with our friends, with our families, that in this situation can only be resolved in Egypt. When there's drought in this particular area, we can get help in Egypt. In fact, for the most of the Bible, Egypt represents worldliness. Egypt represents lack of faith in the rest of the Bible. Yes, there was the physical Egypt, and Abraham's children were to later on go to the physical Egypt as slaves, but for the better part in the Bible, Egypt represents that worldliness. And you know what? When Abraham reached Egypt, he messed. Egypt is a place for people to mess. When you deviate from issues faith, when we deviate from asking God, and we get to Egypt, Egypt is a place to mess. He reached there, and what does he tell Sarah? When we go there, say you are my wife, say you are my sister, so that I'm treated well because of you. You know, it's a place of selfishness. So that I'm treated well because of you. And that's exactly what happened. They reach Egypt, Sarah is taken, and Abraham starts receiving dowry for his wife. Have you ever heard of a husband receiving dowry because of his wife? He is given goats, sheep, livestock, men servant, male servant, female servant. He's given all those, including Hagar. And you know what was to later happen as far as Hagar was concerned. So he messed in Egypt. But God was gracious to this man, just as he is usually gracious to you and I. He intervenes. Sarah does not get married to Pharaoh, and they leave Egypt. They get to Canaan. When they get to Canaan, now Abraham has a lot of livestock, the part of what he had been given by Pharaoh as dowry. Pharaoh did not take it back. He allowed him to go with it. And so when he arrives Canaan, again, we are told that he had a lot of wealth. The man had become exceedingly rich. It was not just richness because his livestock was reproducing. It was richness because he had been blessed, or rather, I don't know whether to that blessing. It's because he had married his wife to another man who had given him. Yeah, And so when they come back to Egypt, his servants and Lord's servant, his nephew, whom he had come with from Ur of Chaldeans, they start quarreling because of the size of their livestock. And there's another situation which shows us Abraham's growing in faith. I think he must have reasoned, if God brought me out of Egypt, if God made sure that my wife was not defiled, if God enabled me to come back with all these livestock, God is able to take care of me. And so what does he do? He tells Lot, you know what? This is my land, but actually the whole land is before you. Choose where you want to go. If you go to the east, I will go to the west. If you go north, I will go to the south. The land is mine, but choose. How many times have we had brothers killing one another because of land? Abraham said, choose. The land is mine. The promise is mine. And my descendants. And my descendants. But you choose. That was surrender. And faith is surrender. Because at that particular time, what Abraham is doing is that he is entrusting himself to this God who revealed to him. And this was growth in his faith. And immediately after he lets Lot have the best of the land, God appears to him and tells him, Abraham, don't be afraid. Don't worry. I'm your reward. In fact, I am your very great reward. That's what he tells him in chapter 15. Don't be afraid. Lot has taken the better part of the land. Don't be afraid. In fact, he is told there, you see, as far as your eyes can see, that is your land. Because I am your reward. But before that, he had manifested surrender. He had shown surrender. He had shown growing faith in allowing Lot to take over the better part of the land. And later on, God was to appear to this man again and tell him, I'm your reward. I am. But Abraham asked God, how can you do this? How can you tell me you are my reward? How can you tell me to keep on moving, and yet Eliezer, my servant, will be my heir? So again, there's some doubts in Abraham's side, because he had been told he'll be given children. But now he's telling God, how can you tell me? How can I be a blessed man? How can I trust you as my reward? And yet Eliezer will be my heir. And God tells Abraham, you know what, Abraham? Come outside. I think it must have been at night. Just step out of your tent. Look up to the sky. Count all the stars you can see, if you can count them. As the number of the stars you can count, so shall your descendants be. Now, this was an amazing thing, and this was a turning point for Abraham, because he was told to look up. He was told to look up. So far, he had been looking around. He looked around where people were going, and he went to Egypt. He looked around when he was leaving Egypt, when he was leaving Ur of Chaldeans, and we shall be talking about it in the next point, and he left with Lot. He had been looking around. But God tells him at this particular time, look up, count the stars. Count the stars. Don't look around. If you look around, you will be discouraged. If you look around, you'll be disappointed. Because you have been trusting God for a wife. You look around, you see all your brothers are married. And you're wondering, God. You look around, you realize that even those who don't worship God have what you have been wanting. And they don't worship God. He could have looked around in Canaan and realized that even boys are getting married and getting children immediately because they were there. He could have looked around and realized that Lot, his nephew, much, much younger than he was, had daughters of marriageable age. He could have looked around and realized that there are people who have already, big portions of land in Canaan. And yet these are people who are not worshiping God. But God comes and tells him, Abraham, look up. I want you to look up. And you know, this morning, even as you go through this, I don't know when you look around, in view of what you have been trusting God, what you see. Maybe your business has been struggling, and you pray every day with your employees. And yet you're wondering, God, how comes those who don't worship God, their businesses are thriving, they are going on. Those who take bribes, those who bribe, those who do entrepreneurs, and and beat around corners. And God is saying, look up. God, how comes my children are not like, no, don't look around. If you look around, you will surely be disappointed. You will surely be discouraged. And so God says, Abraham, look up. Look at my magnificence in creating the stars. Look at my beauty. Look at my promise. Focus on what I told you. I told you I will give you nations. I told you nations will come from your body. I told you kings will be born in your household. So don't look around. Don't look around. Look up, and you will see what God can do. And so on and on, until where we read today, where the author of Hebrew is saying that finally, ultimately, when Abraham was told, sacrifice Isaac, he didn't even question. He didn't even argue with God. Because he had reached a point in his walk with God where he knew this God, when he says he will do something, he will actually do it. And so, since he told me that Isaac is my heir, since he told me that Isaac is the one through whom the promises will be propagated, if this is the same God, and I'm sure he is who is telling me, sacrifice him, put him to death. Even if I was to put him to death, he is able to bring them back to life. And so the author of Hebrews says, in a way, Abraham received Isaac back from the dead. He received Isaac back from the dead. Abraham had an obedient faith. So long as Abraham understood the word of God, he obeyed that word of God. So long as Abraham understood the word of God, he obeyed the word of God. Let me tell you, living is not easy. Living is not easy. And I want you to imagine with me, at 75 years of age, I don't know how many of us are 75, apart from Professor Kinoti. I don't know whether there is anybody else who is over 75. But Abraham at this time is 75. He has real property. He has built his home. He is living in a city. He has his relatives settled there. He has his gods there. He has his father's household. He is taking care of Lot, who was left by his father when he was still very young. Lot's father was his brother. He is settled. He doesn't need to go anywhere. It is easier to move around when you're 20, when you're 25, when you're 19. Those are the people who move around. But you don't hear so often somebody 75 years, wanting to get a green card to go to the US. It's a bit rare. If they have looked for green cards at 75, there are not many. At that time, you want to settle down. You want to eat from your investments. You want to be around your grandchildren. Those are the things that bring you excitement at that particular time. But actually, when he heard that he should leave, he left. He left. Because to follow, you must be able to leave something. And he had to follow Jesus from that time. He had to follow God from that time. But Abraham, and by this time he was called Abram, but Abram still, there were still some few issues even about his obedience at this particular time. But even that obedience kept growing. You remember he was told, leave your father's household. But when he left Ur of Chaldeans, he left with his father, he left with his nephew, Lot. So it was not total obedience at that particular time. He found it hard to leave his father's household. And you can understand. You can understand. But sometimes we struggle even to leave what? Even to leave sin. Sometimes there's a level of sin that tastes sweet. Did you know that? There are some sins that taste sweet. This is wrong. But, like on Friday I was talking with another young man. And, he's telling me, I hate sin. And then why don't you get saved? No. And you can tell this man, there is something he doesn't want to leave. There's something holding him. He doesn't want to leave. He doesn't want to leave where he is. But Abraham left, although he didn't leave as he had been told to leave. It wasn't until when his servants and Lord's servants started fighting over grazing rights. Then he let Lot go. He let Lot go. And most likely, since Abraham did not have a child, he could have held on to Lot as a possible heir. All this property I've accumulated will not go to a foreigner. All this property that God has helped me to have will not go to anyone else or to someone that I just meet in Canaan. Let's hold on to Lot. And many times we hold on to Lot in our lives. Something that, this one, God, yes, I have left the country. In fact, I have left even my brother. But this one, just help, let me keep. Let me keep this one because of a rainy day. Let me keep this one because of a kind of an eventuality that I do not know. Like a security. Let me keep this. Let me just hold on to this. It is John Calvin who often used to say that while it is faith alone that justifies, faith that justifies is never alone. It is faith alone that justifies, but faith that justifies is never alone. It is always accompanied by obedience and some evidence of that faith. Faith that justifies is never alone. Is never alone. And going back to that incident where Lot goes, and when he goes, he chooses the best lad, and then God appears to Abraham. Immediately after that, God appears. And that's what happens. When we let go of what God has told us to let go, when we obey fully, when Abraham finally obeyed fully, and now he was alone. He didn't have a member of his father's household. He didn't have a member of his own country. He didn't have a relative around him. Now he was as he was supposed to live. He was as he had been told to do or to live from the time he was called. He was all alone at this particular time with his wife. That time, God appears to him. And what's the message from God? He tells him, Abram, do not be afraid. I am your shield, your very great reward. Very, very loaded words. Abram, do not be afraid. Could it be that Abram was afraid of letting Lot go? Because he didn't know exactly, this child was promised, and now I'm 80-something, will he really come? And he's thinking, no, let me hold on to Lot. What if I was to be attacked in this foreign country? What if this child never comes? What if? And he was holding on to Lot with some fears. But when he lets Lot go, God comes and says, Abram, do not be afraid. I am your shield. I'm your defender. I'm your protector. I am an army around you. Do not worry. I will protect you. I am there as a shield around you. I am with you. I am your very great reward. Not just a reward. I am your very great reward. Your very great reward. And I wonder where we are today, I wonder whether there is something that God is waiting for us to let go before he comes and tells us, Peter, Jane, Naomi, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. I am your shield. I am your very great reward. Let go. I'm your reward. I'll be with you. I am your reward. I am with you. And I've always been with you. Could it be that God is waiting for us to let go of one or two things before we fully realize the promises that he has promised in our lives? Or before he has given us that which we have been trusting for? That there is one or two things that God is saying, let go of this. Maybe it's a relationship that God just wants to let go of this also. And then I will come in and say, you know what? I am your reward. I am your reward. I am your reward. And you know, in this discussion with God, or after this discussion with God, of Abraham being told, I am your reward. You know what happened after that in chapter 16? Hagar happened. Hagar still happened. Even with all this assurance that I am your reward, I am your shield, I'm with you, Hagar still happened. Ishmael happened. And we shall be talking about that later on. But by the time God was done with Abraham's obedience, when he told, the ultimate test was, sacrifice your son. And at that time, Abraham did not have any argument. He didn't have any explanation to give. He didn't have, it was, where is the sword? Where is the firewood? Let's arrange the firewood. And he bowed his son and was ready to let his son to go. But Abraham also had a very patient faith. Actually, Abraham showed very rare patience. Very, very rare patience. And someone said that patience creates depth. Someone has noted that in today's world, we are lacking depth because we are not patient. We are accustomed to things happening so fast. You want this, you get it in the afternoon. You want to shop online, you want to shop, you don't have to go to the shop. You just need the internet, you shop, and you have the product in a few hours' time, or the following day. We have become accustomed to things happening very, 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 very fast. And actually, someone said that, the depth of spiritual maturity does not come quickly. There are some things that will come quickly. There are things that technology will help us to get very, very quickly. But there are some others, regardless of advancement in technology, we still have to go through the whole course. I doubt whether there's a child who will be born regardless of technology, who will just need to be taken to hospital and he starts operating people. They still have to go to school, primary, secondary, university, until they are declared a doctor, and then, or somebody is born today and they are a lawyer. They have to go through the whole spectrum of education. And it is still the same in matters of faith. We just have to be patient. I do not think we'll get saved today and tomorrow we have everything going for us. So he says it must be built over time. And then he continued to say, and I totally agree with him, when he says that if greed is a demon of money, and if lust is the demon of sex, if pride is the demon of power, speed is the demon of depth. Speed is a demon of depth. And so, Abraham and Sarah waited for 10 good years. From the time the promise was given up to the time Abraham is about 85. There's no sign for a child. They have waited. They have exercised faith. They have told their relatives, we are leaving Ur of Chaldeans because we have met the true God. He has promised us a child. They have reached Canaan. They have told their friends that, you know what? God promised us a child. People have waited. They have waited year 1, year 2, up to year 10. Up to year 10. And Sarah came up with a wonderful idea, although it is seemed, that he tells Abraham, you know, when we were leaving Egypt, we were given maid servants and male servants. You remember? And among the female servants, there was a beautiful girl called Hagar. And so Sarah tells Abraham, you know what? In these promises you keep talking about, I have not even mentioned. You just come and tell me God met with you and told you he's going to get a son. God met you and said you're going to get a child. So why don't we do what Kasha dictates when people reach where we are? Why don't we just do what everybody else does when situations like have happened to us happen? You know, take Hagar, get a child through Hagar. And that's exactly what happened. You know, a couple that has been patient for 10 years, all of a sudden, things change. Things change. And so Ishmael was born as a result. Ishmael was born. And you know what? They got, if you are to grade them on this, as far as Kasha was concerned, as far as conforming with what used to happen at that particular time was concerned, they got an A. As far as theology was concerned, it was a strong F. It was a very, very strong F. And I think this Kasha is also there in Africa. This I know I have a neighbor who didn't have children. At one point, the wife married a lady. And so they were able to raise a family. So this seemed a Kasha that has been there among many communities. And that's exactly what they did. And you know, something happened when they went this way. Heaven was quiet for another 13 years. For a whole 13 years, God did not say anything to Abraham. My dear, this was after he had been told, I am your reward, your very great reward. I will protect you, I am your shield, do not be afraid. You know, then Ishmael happens, and heaven is quiet for another 13 years. At least one thing they must have learned is that even if you try to rush God, God is not going to change his timetable. God is not going to change his timetable. God is not going to be rushed. You know, his timetable, his timing, his dates are not going to change because we are in a hurry. Because we are in a hurry. Of course, for him, he has the benefit of operating without time. But you operate within time. And so sometimes we get concerned. I'm getting old. You know, this house I've been waiting for. And now I'm getting to, I'm almost retiring. The house is still not, when will I enjoy this house? Let me do at entrepreneur and supply air. Because there's a possibility of supplying air, and you get your millions, and you get your home. This husband I've been waiting for. I'm not getting young. Let me just, yes, whatever happens, let it happen. But God is not rushed by our hurry. He says, if it was meant to take 10 years, it will take 10 years. If it was supposed to take 25 years, it will still take 25 years. Abraham tried to plead, if only your promises can be accomplished through Ishmael. God said, no. It will be through the son you'll get between you and Sarah. So for 13 years, heaven is quiet. And Abraham is there. wondering what happened. What happened? And after 13 years, I think by the end of 13 years, Abraham was fully surrendered to God. His faith was fully mature. He had waited until, he realized, what? Let God be God. Let God be called God. God is God, and I am not. There's only one God, and it is not me. That's where he reached. Total surrender. And when he reached there, God speaks. He has been quiet for 13 years. But God now speaks. And he says, Abraham, I'm the Lord Almighty. That's where we get the El Shaddai. I am God El Shaddai. I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. It's almost as if he is being reminded of what he had done before. Walk before me, be blameless, and walk before me in faithfulness. Because I am El Shaddai. And this is now where we're saying one of the advantages he had was that he had El Shaddai as his benefactor. The name El Shaddai, or rather the name of God, El Shaddai, means the Almighty One. I am the Almighty One. I am the overpowering one, ever present. I am the eternal God. I am the omnipotent. I am faithful. I am good. I am sovereign. You looked around, you saw Hagar. You looked around, you saw Lot. You looked around, now you have been able to look up. And at this point, I want you to know that I am El Shaddai. I am El Shaddai. It is the best place to reach in our journey of faith, where we acknowledge that God is the El Shaddai, where we acknowledge that there's only one God, and this one God is not found among my relatives, is not found among the peoples of the nations, is not found among my friends, is not found in the government, he's found up there. And he is the El Shaddai. He is the ultimate one. And so when he says, I am your very great reward, we can embrace that word and say, God, you are my great reward. That's what I will hold on to. You remember that song? I need no other argument. I need no other plea. I have found there. Anyway, I need no other argument. I need no other plea. I have the El Shaddai. I think when we reach there, then God comes in, and actually he affirms that. I am the El Shaddai. I am the Almighty One. And the message at this time was, within a year, you are going to get a child. And when Abraham heard that, he could only fall down and worship. His arguments had come to an end. 13 years of silence from heaven, after Ishmael happened, after Hagar happened, 13 years of silence had taught Abraham, let me walk with my God. Let me just listen to that voice I heard before I left Ur of Chaldeans. That God who called him, that God who 13 years ago came and told me he is my reward. And I deviated. I got Hagar. I deviated. I got Ishmael. That God is the one now I want to hold to. And when he reached there, at that time, that God comes in chapter 17, and he says, Abraham, I am El Shaddai. I'm the Almighty. I'm the ever-present one. Even when you went to Egypt, I saw you. Even before you went to Egypt, if you had asked me to provide for you in Negev, I would have provided for your livestock there. There was no need of going to Egypt. You went to Egypt, you came back with Hagar. I am the El Shaddai. I am the El Shaddai. And within a year, you are going to get a child. I want to put a mark on you for the covenant we are about to enter into, to seal the covenant, to seal this, to seal my promises. And chapter 17 is long. We don't have the time and the benefit to go through it. But he tells him, I am the El Shaddai. I will sort you out. I will sort you out. I have seen your faith for those 13 years. And the good thing with Abraham, since Hagar happened, since Ishmael came, I'm convinced that he didn't go back to Hagar again. Because in 13 years' time, he would have had 3-4 children with Hagar. Hagar happened, he learned his lessons, and he said, you know what? Let me wait. God specifically now has said, it is with Sarah, I'm going to wait until we get a child with Sarah. And the other thing about this El Shaddai is that he waited. He waited until Abraham's hope, biological hopes for getting a child were finished. At 0. Sarah's womb as dead. No, Sarah's womb, he says, was dead. There were no signs in Sarah's body that she can still conceive. At his body, he says, it was as good as dead. And it's at that time that then God comes and says, you know what? In this situation, when someone reaches here, I am the El Shaddai. And because I'm the El Shaddai, it is at this time that I take over. I like taking over when there is no chance that it can be attributed to your effort or attributed to your body. That's a time that I, as the El Shaddai, I like glorifying myself. I don't know where we are today, even as we continue with this subject of faith. Maybe you're at a point where we have reached a point that we are afraid of something. And God is saying, do not be afraid. I'm your shield. Maybe you're at a point where we are considering going to Egypt because there's a drought. And God, don't go to Egypt. You might come back with a Hagar. You might come back with Hagar. Don't go to Egypt. You might auction your loved ones there. Don't. Maybe you're at a point you are just about to take Hagar. And God says, no, I am the El Shaddai. It might take another 13 years. In fact, the way God had started in chapter 15, it almost gives me the impression that Isaac would have come a bit early. The way God opened chapter 15 is almost the same way he opened chapter 17. After 13 years gap. It gives me an impression that perhaps if Hagar did not come in, Isaac may have come maybe about 10 years earlier. We may never know. We may never know because the Bible does not tell us. But the thing is, there is a possibility that if you go the Hagar way, that promise you have been waiting, that prayer request you have been waiting for a response, it might take a bit longer. So God is saying, no. You are just about to go to Hagar way, stop. You're about to go to Egypt, don't. You have been holding to Lot, let go. Because I am your great reward. Your very great reward. I am your shield. I am the El Shaddai, the Almighty, the All-Powerful, and I'm able to sort you. You have reached the end. You have reached the very, very, very end. Now I can take over because I am the El Shaddai.